This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the February edition of The Compliance Life. This month I am featuring another director of trade compliance who now has her own consulting firm, Ellen Smith. I've known Ellen for quite some time. We were both in the Houston compliance community, and Ellen once again has a fascinating journey to and from the director's chair for trade compliance. She has a lot of experience in law firm work and other areas I think you will find fascinating on this journey in the compliance life. In this episode, Ellen Smith discusses her move in-house.
The Compliance Life details the journey to and in the role of a Chief Compliance Officer. How does one come to sit in the CCO chair? What are some of the skills a CCO needs to successfully navigate the compliance waters in any company? What are some of the top challenges CCOs have faced, and how did they meet them? These questions and many others will be explored in this new podcast series. The Compliance Life is hosted by Tom Fox, and each month he'll present the story of one CCO through 4 episodes. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
We're going to have a quick word from our sponsor, and they'll be right back with Valerie Charles on The Compliance Life. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode on The Compliance Life with Ellen Smith. Today, we're going to take up Ellen's in-house career. So, Ellen, first of all, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. This is so much fun. I appreciate you letting me tell my story.
Wow, I almost heard a little Texas accent in there. We'll get to that later. Today we're going to move, or rather in this episode, we're going to move to your in-house career. So you were at an international trade law firm, and then you moved in-house. Could you tell us why you moved in-house and what the move was?
Sure. I was working in Chicago, downtown Chicago, and living up north in Lake County, which is right at the Wisconsin-Illinois border. And frankly, I was commuting, and I had my second kid, and it got hard to commute, that distance and raise. I had 2 young children at the time. So I started looking and decided to make the change and had the opportunity to go in-house at Jockey International. Again, another international firm, and Jockey was intrigued by my customs compliance experience from the law firm and my trade experience. They also happened to be in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which was about 15 minutes from my house, so that made it easier for me as a young mother, or a mother with young children at the time. That's the reason why I went in-house, and it was a good fit. It was a small legal department. Jockey's a privately held company. It's got a huge brand name, so people are always surprised that when I say that. It's a brand that's recognized around the world, but it's based in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and small legal team with, at the time, there were 3 or 4 lawyers, and I ended up being eventually second sort of in command to the general counsel, Mark Jager, and a lot of great experience. They hired me as a customs compliance lawyer, and I ran the social compliance or the corporate responsibility or social responsibility program at Jockey. So making sure we weren't in any sweatshops and abiding by customs laws and security and everything else.
So I can think of, I was trying to tick off in my head while you were talking the number of product companies that are so ubiquitous. When you say the name of the company, you know what the product is. And obviously Kleenex is, in my mind, number 1. But Jockey's right up there at number 2 or 3. And when you say Jockey, I think everyone knows the products that they make and literally are famous worldwide for that. And that continues literally to this day. The obviously close to the Canadian border, with I would assume issues around export into Canada and perhaps some import issues. But what I really wanted to ask was a couple of different things. One is what you learned about a team structure and why that was so important, and how even with a small legal department, that team structure facilitated literally a worldwide reach. And then two, you're one of the first people I've come across who was doing CSR work in the first decade of this century. We may have called it something different, but you were doing the work that we now call ESG. And tell us a little bit about that, both of those topics.
For the listeners that are probably a little older, our age or so, you'll remember the Kathy Gifford Guatemala issue, where there was child labor, and Kathy and Regis and Kathy, I think that's what it was, right? Regis and Kathy, and she got called out for having child labor in Guatemala that was producing the clothing or the apparel that was under her name. And that hit the apparel industry in the 90s and then, of course, onward. And the apparel industry had to respond, and they had to put in place their corporate social responsibility programs. So Jockey was very involved with the AAFA, which is the American Apparel and Footwear Association, and I still have some very good friends there. They helped set up a program called WRAP, which is at the time it was Worldwide Responsible Apparel Production. Now it's the acronym means has a different association, but it was a sort of group so that each brand wasn't going into a factory and applying their own rules to the factory. WRAP gave a certification that could be accepted by brands. So I had the really great opportunity in the corporate social responsibility space of learning that at Jockey. I didn't really know it before I went in there, but there's so many parallels with the compliance space that we know today, and like you said, at ESG as it's coming about, and all the other industries that are having to pay attention to this, especially as we go in today. With what we know, U.S. Customs is looking at with the forced labor issues in China. So it's really interesting. I'm so happy that I had that experience. Another great mentor that I have, Mark Jager. He was the general counsel at Jockey at the time. Mark put in he just had a really great team structure. Everybody sort of had their responsibilities, but we all worked together because of the way he built the team. And we could cross over and cross-train each other and work towards that same, whatever was the issue of the day. And there were a lot of different issues at Jockey as we went through because it was a well-known brand and because of the way we did business. Mark also did a weekly team meeting with strategy meetings, sort of, again, as I mentioned in the previous podcast, what my experience was at Salvey, Shostak, and Pritchard. And, again, sort of strategizing what was on the plate and how we move forward. So really understanding, what sort of resources we needed and the various, with a really small legal department, how we would all come together to handle those issues of the day.
Ellen, I've talked to a couple of people who were either in-house legal or compliance and at brands that are iconic in American business. And they certainly had pride with that brand, but they said it also brought a level of pressure. And it brought a level of pressure that not only do we have to keep going, but we've been so successful, we have to maintain what the others before us have built. And so that there really was, I don't want to say esprit de corps, but really a feeling that, we are something special. Was there that feeling at Jockey as well?
Yeah, there sure was. I mean, Jockey actually did a lot of private label stuff for other brands. So we weren't only just representing our brand, but brands like Tommy Hilfiger at the time and Liz Claiborne, another older brand. But we were producing apparel for those under our license agreements for those brands as well. So there was a lot of pressure to really, when we say if there's a compliance issue, we might end up on the front cover of the Wall Street Journal. When you're talking about a well-known brand like Jockey, that's a big deal. And those are things that were always we were always considering. In fact, we talked a lot. Mark and I talked a lot about, really, there's corporate social responsibility, there's compliance, but really at the end of the day, it's brand reputation management, and that's what we were managing.
Many of the listeners to this podcast are not trade compliance specialists, so I wanted to ask you, what is a U.S. focused assessment? What is the process to go through it? Why is it so intense? And what did you really learn going through that process at Jockey?
This is a fun story that I have, I think. I was at Jockey for 2 weeks, and that I was sitting at a desk, and the phone rang on my desk. And, I was there 2 weeks. Nobody really knew who I was. So I pick up the phone, and on the other end of the phone was a customs auditor. Her name was Cindy DeLeon. And she said, Cindy DeLeon, with field auditor with U.S. Customs, and you're an importer of record. Jockey's been selected for a focused assessment. And I said, okay, I don't know what that, I didn't say I don't know what that is, but I was like, okay, let me talk to my boss. So hung up and went to Mark and said, we just got a call for focused assessment. And he's like, oh no. So I knew at the time focused assessment was, at the time, it was sort of new for U.S. Customs. This is back in 2002, 2003 time period. And what a focused assessment is, it's a full-blown customs audit. So it means Customs has selected the importer of record, in this case it was Jockey International, to come in and do an audit. And they look at everything. It's, full open kimono here, and you have to come in and look at everything. So Cindy led the customs team. They came in to do the audit. It means, we did, I can't remember what the number was, our volumes, but we did a lot. I think maybe like 10,000 imports a year. These are apparel imports, so textile and apparel with U.S. Customs. I think it's about 41% of the duties that are collected in the U.S. come from the textile and apparel industry. And so it's a big deal. There's a lot of money involved. And Jockey had a really interesting supply chain model. This is the other thing I really learned at Jockey, and it was supply chain. It really was going through this focused assessment where I learned so much about supply chain. But Jockey, we had our own factories. We knit our own fabric in the U.S. and in Central America. We had our own factories where we sewed, where our products were sewn. And we also outsourced, primarily in Asia. But at the time, we had all three of those sort of really interesting ways of manufacturing our products. And we used a whole lot of different ways to value those products. And that's what Customs is interested in. Really, making sure that we're declaring our goods the right way with our classifications, that we're valuing the goods the right way, with the value that we apply when they come into the United States, particularly with related parties, and then with the country of origin. So if you're knitting fabric in the United States and then you're sending it to Central America, to Costa Rica, for example, to be sewn, and then it comes back to the United States, what is the country of origin of that product? There's some pretty specific rules that have to be applied, and it's really complicated in the textile and apparel industry. So I got to jump in right away and learn all of that as we went through the focused assessment, and it was a 3-year process, but at the end of the day, we only had a $500 additional exposure that we self-disclosed to Customs. So it was a win for us at Jockey. They told us we were doing everything the right way, and essentially, and it was great. I also built a tremendous relationship and friendship with Cindy DeLeon, who eventually left Customs, moved to Houston, Texas, and opened up her own consulting practice. And Cindy was one of my mentors. I think it's safe to say when I decided to go out on my own. I eventually moved to Houston, Texas, too. So we remain good friends.
So, Ellen, unfortunately, no, actually, we're not near the end of our time, because there's something else I wanted to ask you about. One of the issues you had to deal with, I believe, with the Canadian officials was valuation. And that's something that I had to deal with as in-house at Halliburton. And there's always a difference. How do you document the valuation for regulatory purposes?
Yeah, we had, in fact, there's the court case for the Jockey products being imported into Canada. We had the privilege, I guess, of hosting the CBSA in Kenosha, Wisconsin. CBSA is the Canada the Canada Customs Group. So CBSA came and did an audit. It was an audit focused on valuation. We used a lot of different valuation methods, but really it was the internal transfer price between Jockey US and Jockey Canada that was the focus of that assessment. And when you have sister companies and you have that transfer price that you're applying, transfer price is usually it's very related to tax, and the tax folks want to look at a transfer price on the aggregate. What is the profit that needs to move back and forth between sister companies for tax reasons, and customs looks at it on a transactional basis. So you got to find a way to make the two work, and learned a whole lot about transfer pricing in the Jockey model. There's a court case out there with Canada Customs on Jockey, so if anybody's interested, you can go check it out and read it. But it talks through the really intense transfer pricing methodologies of multinational companies and why that's so important.
Well, in the Halliburton legal department, if you could say transfer pricing, you were an expert because you at least knew it was a word. So I completely get it. Ellen, now we are, unfortunately, at the end of our time for this episode, but we're going to have our segment of favorite adopted saying or sayings. So What do you have for us from Jockey?
Great. I love sharing these. So Mark Jager, my was general counsel at Jockey, and again, another great mentor for me. And Mark had such a great way of expressing what he wanted people to do in sort of a soft manner. And he always used the word perhaps when he was talking about something. And he'd say, well, perhaps we need to do it this way. And then he meant, it was like, yeah, we're going to do it this way. But it wasn't like, you're going to do it this way. It was, perhaps we'll do it this way. And it's just a soft way of really explaining what you need to have done. And I have adopted that. I use that to this day, and I just love that word now because of Mark. My other favorite line from Jockey, and I do a lot of speaking engagements on trade issues, and I always try and find a way to throw this in, even in my trainings that I do. But this is actually a saying that I live by, and at Jockey we had a motto: life is like underwear, change is good. And I love change. All my teams throughout my career know that nothing is static in my world, that I'm always sort of moving things around and making sure we're delivering what's best for the client, whether it was an in-house client or now with my clients in my practice. But I love that saying because I think it's so true. Change is good, and it's just like underwear.
Well, I wanted to thank you. This has been a ton of fun in this episode 2. I hope our listeners will join us for episode 3 because we're going to take a deep dive as Ellen moves to the great state of Texas and goes into one of the biggest messes in the energy company world that we saw and came out of it just great. So we're going to take that up in episode 3. Ellen, I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Compliance Life. I hope you will join me again next week where I take up another episode in The Compliance Life. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you would like to be featured on The Compliance Life, please give me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, if you like this series, please give us a rating on iTunes. Any review and rating would definitely help get the word out about the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.